I think Anthony Huso is one of the best D&D adventure designers ever. I've written about this and I've reviewed a couple of his adventures on this channel. And so today I want to talk about I guess just about why that is. I did one already in this series on Bruce Cordell and talked about his breadth of work, and I'll do the same for Tony. I know Tony Littleby is a great guy. He has not paid me to do this. I am just a fan of his modules, which I have bought all of the printed ones, and in 3 of them I've also bought the PDF. I run them across a lot of my groups. When I first started getting into OSR stuff, I think Tony was a bit less well known than he is now. He'd done a lot of very important theory, like rules theory stuff on how AD&D was intended to run. And he'd published 2 or 3 adventures. I think maybe 3, maybe he'd got to Galaxian Cannon. But at any rate, or Mortuary Temple, I'm not sure. It is around then. He'd done 3, I think. At any rate, now it does seem like he is a less obscure figure in the OSR. He is a games designer and writer and other things, artist, who has ended up getting into this via deciding to switch from Pathfinder back to, this was over a decade ago maybe, or just over that. He can correct me, I'm sure. Switching back from Pathfinder, the group he had, to AD&D, which he'd loved when he was younger, and then he's not returned back. He has a blog which is currently has gone into stasis as he's focusing on running his new campaign material on his world of Adumim, which has no current kind of planned release date, though I think eventually it will probably get out there somehow. So he has 6 published adventures and 3 blog adventures, things you can get off his blog, and there's some other kind of random material, but that's the adventure material. Let's see if I can slightly improve the angle. There we go. So I'll do it, I guess, in order of level of the adventure, with one qualification, or one not qualification, framing device for it being that what I have looked for previously, or described previously when looking at how good adventure designers are, is the breadth of the work. How much is there? If you've got one really good adventure but nothing else, that's going to limit you in terms of how important you are as a designer, how great you are. One great novel, very rarely does one great novel make you an all-time great writer in other areas. Sometimes it does, and I think you could imagine that. So Tolkien published 2 major novels, of which one is really on his modern reputation is based. But I think in general, you say, really great writers who become canonical. Occasionally, you might get a Tolkien, but usually it's far more like someone who's got several interesting works. And so breadth is one kind of category. Originality or creativity. Originality is a disputable quality. What does it mean? But essentially invention, the ability to add ways of thinking about adventures to the game. I think that's the second kind of category. And the third is, I would say, the depth of their work. How interesting is it? How distinctive is it? How finessed is it? So not just kind of, is it interesting or good, but kind of how much does it iterate quality? And so that's what we do. And obviously with Tony, there's going to be some distinction between books he has gone out of his way to publish versus, they're on Lulu, by the way, versus books which are, adventures which are just online. So let's start with Galaxian Fall, which is HU4, is his 4th adventure. This is a plane hopping, or rather kind of planar, is on one plane, the astral, low-level adventure. Because the Lich's base, which the PCs are meant to go to, is protected against high level characters. So it's for 2nd or 3rd level technically, though I think first level could just about fit through it as well. And you gain a level automatically upon leaving. And technically, I guess, can you go back if you are still below 4th level at the end? I suppose you might be able to. I don't remember. I've run this. It is a really interesting module. One, just how interesting is that he said, look, this is a low-level adventure to get people a free way, an easy way to level up. If they can survive the dungeon, they just get a level by the magic of the place trying to protect itself. But he's also said, but it gets to be planar. It gets to be weird. There's Cthulhian creatures. There's a lich at the end who you really don't want to wake up. And there's incredible treasure. Now that is one thing I'll quickly mention now. He is excellent at giving very high level incentives to the players. So, for instance, there's potions of rapturous visions, quantum crowns, soul resonance weapons, wand of magic detection, a ring of featherfall, 4 crystal chests filled with 50,000 silver each, a gem of brightness, 7 pearls of power, a carpet of flying. These are second and third level players, and because the point is by the time they get there, they're on a timer essentially versus a number of potential risks. They're just trying to grab what they have before they activate essentially the port key to get out. So, and I think that's just a genuinely brilliant decision to say, look, low-level players get to do fun things. Not that all low-level adventures should be therefore wacky and crazy in that way, as if there's no value to the barrow or to the to dealing with the goblins in the wood. There absolutely is, I think. But as part of a suite of options, that's creative and interesting. And by this point, he learns to write adventures basically over time. And on the whole, having practically run this, there are some questions about exactly what way you'd arrange the information. For instance, there's essentially an appendix on getting them to and from in the Astral Sea. You could arguably have put that at the start and had a kind of wider discussion of the Astral Sea. There is a whole stat line for the Gringling Lich King, which is obviously there for flavour rather than for the fact that your players are going to fight him, because there's no point. But the actual main dungeon, one thing is actually the relative generosity of this book is that only about half of it is the adventure. The adventure is 7 rooms, which are 2 or 3, well, between 1 and 3 pages, usually 2 or 3. There are 7 chambers, and it's the shape of an hourglass. It becomes clear. I don't think there is any side view of it, but basically the rooms themselves are pretty apparently like that. You can see here is the big spreads of the rooms. There's the top, and then you've got the middle there, and and then down to the bottom, which is the place. That's really this one, which is where the Lich King is. So this hourglass in space, which you have to portal through because the rooms aren't connected by just doors. You have to portal through, and there is a pattern to the portal with puzzles involved. It will involve a degree of almost roguelike running through to work out which rooms connect to which rooms and how and what the rules of connection are, which is just a really satisfying riddle. And he definitely does riddles of that kind. By riddles, I mean kind of non-mechanical puzzles. Well, there's the combat is interesting, and the kind of threats are interesting because it is not intended. You're more likely to encounter outside of the throne room. You're more likely to encounter a really, really dangerous thing in the Astral Sea travelling than in the Fall itself. But I mean, there's Astral Stalkers, Astral Migos, which are new but which are 3 HD, so they're very much like Astral Stalkers. You've got a lightning elemental, but who essentially you're just meant to avoid. There is a dysfunctioning Modron, a Shuktulv, which is also, that's 3d10 for hit dice, so strong 3 HD. A Tyrefeg, which is 2 HD. Pudding Oracle, not a bad guy. He's a pudding, but he can help you with stuff, and can help you transport around stuff. It has a bunch of interesting artifacts. Basically, you can, generally speaking, get one artifact if you spend your question on that. So usability is reasonably high. You could do with some summaries maybe at different points, but the fact there are spreads of the maps are good at the end, and I found that very useful for running it online, which is how I ran this. I've run others in different formats at different times. The creativity is high, and it's a good entry at the bottom of the pyramid for adventures. The other starting adventure he has is on the blog. It's called the Dreaming Tower. It's in a blog post called Ormolu, which is the city associated with it, and the Dreaming Tower, where basically you're sent out to go and clear out a tower and make it into a base. And this is a first level adventure or thereabouts. And again, that's great. Just even though it's much more mundane, the stakes are high in terms of the potential incentives are high, and the ability to interact, like you're trying to work out what's happened to the previous people there. There's a Chasme, a fly demon you can negotiate with or fight or whatever. And there is the capacity to expand it, have more dungeons, etc. Reminds me a bit in that sense of Pillars of Eternity, actually. And I think, yeah, it's a solid adventure. It's a decent dungeon key. I definitely pressure Anthony to put this and the other 2 blog adventures he's put out into a collected volume or something. But to be honest, Ormolu and the Dreaming Tower could stand alone. The city itself is interesting too. What lets it down is just its presentation. It's a lot harder to use stuff off the blog. But I think he has probably not put it out partly because it's less exciting than Zhou and Fu. I would say that they're an interesting set of companion pieces as low-level adventures that you could put in your world, particularly if you combine, and we'll get to this at the Nightwolf in HU1. You know, you can imagine this Husonian, Adamimian is his world, kind of setting where they get their base, they go on an extraplanar adventure, they're connected with this planar adventuring guild, things like that. Next is, I think, we're on HU3, Mortuary Temple of Esme, is 5th through 7th. This was a rewrite of something he wrote in the 80s, as was Nightwolf in. And which some people have observed, this means the top 2 levels are stronger than the bottom level because they were play tested, in the sense they were run in the 80s and had a good test then and a rewrite as a result, whereas this is not so. The bottom layer has not been rewritten for this publication. Basically, it's a ruined temple to some elves, or it's a tomb for some elves, but it's been corrupted by Orcus worshippers, and that's Orcus is a major player in his previous campaign, and so essentially certainly downstairs. It's interesting. An adventure that really has obviously influenced him is WG4, Lost Temple of Tharasdon. This is kind of in many ways like the lower levels. The lower levels of this are reminiscent of the lower levels of Tharasdon. And yeah, I think this is a slighter entry. Presentationally, it's good. It's up to this point, yeah, I think pretty clearly the best presentationally. There's still no summary list of rooms anywhere, but then lots of other very successful adventures don't use usability tricks like that. It has his prose is let's take the opportunity now. His prose is colourful, flowery, usually beautiful when it's descriptive, and when it's not descriptive, it's very functional. You can hear me talk about this more in specific reviews I did on Fable City of Brass and Nightwolf in. This is, as I say, a slighter example of his work, though in some ways, it's a mid-level, multi-level dungeon, and so it should be, for many people, for many authors, it's where their real chops come out. I think this is less important than some of his other works. I do enjoy it. I think it is fun. I have run it, and I think the combination of the types of interactions you have, like the undead elf general you can ally with, the dragon you can technically ally with, but realistically you'll fight with his tribe of bullywugs. At the lower levels, with the corruption seeping through, that you can investigate, or like my party, you can flee from because it's pretty awful. I think that's a good combination, and it's all pretty well combined, and it's much like you see with Zhou and Fu, the way in which he is influenced by deities and demigods and the supernatural, far realmish, Lovecraftian horror of, something that really influences Gygax in first edition is I think really clear in this one. I mean, it is in all of them to some degree, but this is one of those ones where it's explicitly the aim of the adventure as you go down and do stuff. Another blog adventure, actually slightly lower level than that. Palace Vulray is 4th to 6th level. It is 24 rooms, 1 level. It's a elven ruin and inhabited by monsters. There is an important riddle. Tony loves riddles. Presentationally, this is again tough because it is in a database format, basically, which will display well if you're using it properly and won't if you're not. And that's something. And it is a Palace of the Vampire Queen style key. It's much better than that in terms of its writing, but I mean, as in it is just room descript treasure plus maps. So you have to, presentationally, you're going to have to make an imaginative leap to use Palace Vulray. It is probably, of all of these, the slightest of them all, because and slighter than Dreaming Tower, because Dreaming Tower is more exciting. It has more of this campaign setup feel with the city attached to Ormolu. Whereas Palace Vulray is much more like a here's a location. It's a 1 or 2. It's a 2 session probably for many parties, maybe 3 for if you're running short sessions, but 2 sessions maybe. And it feels in that sense like an interlude between bigger adventures, which is what it was originally. The third and final blog adventure is the Silver Temple, which I think is 7th or 8th level. And this is what he used to introduce his Pathfinder players to First Ed. This is the setup, evil characters attacking the base of a good order. It's got a looping map that's quite good. It's got good base defense plans in that sense. It is another one that feels influenced by WG4. It's very cool as a gimmick. It's very specific though, isn't it? Very few people are going to say, oh yeah, I think I can work this in as an objective in my player's campaign. You could reskin it, but its specificity, and again, to some degree, the fact that you're working off the blog presentation does limit its use. You can see though already, and we're going to get into what I think are the most exciting things he did soon, relatively soon. But I think what you can see is that he has a great range in terms of things he's willing to do. Extra planar adventure that's low level in that case. He's willing to have a kind of go and purge and clear out a base and own it. That kind of thing. Kind of classic fiefdom building. He's got a barrow style, the mortuary temple, but with supernatural horror. So you can really see there's a lot of breadth, originality. I think there's a couple of those things which are quite fresh ideas or fresh takes on ideas. So yeah, that's. I think something to say already. I think we're going to get into his real strengths as we get to these higher levels. This is HU5, marked HU4, but HU5 Gearlo Sin Cruel, I think is how it's pronounced. Yep, Gearlo Sin Cruel. Is a cloud giant holy site hundreds of miles deep in the Amhark Mountains, beyond the fallen Isle of Burim, through the sun gate and above the snow line, where finally rise the whitened shoulders of the world. So, yes, this is, you can see influences coming into this. It has a touch, actually, of the, something like the Giants trilogy. It's 5th to 13th level, I think, is a pretty wide range. I think he did it 9th to 13th, sorry. I think he did it mostly at the higher end there, maybe 12th. What to say about this? It definitely draws a bit on that and on the Giants trilogy in terms of its theming, but not in terms of its content. It is a big ruin, and so in that sense, it is as much. In fact, maybe it's more like something like Sojkant in terms of your Galaxian Cannon, and I think that's something. I think Tony might say that was a good comparison in some ways. It's heavy wargame influence. This is, in that sense, though I do wargame, I don't necessarily see my D&D as combat focused as Tony does, and so in that sense this is one that I think he knows is maybe more specific in its interest, not in terms of its gimmick but in terms of its interest, because it is a grimy, tough, challenging exploration of a ruin. With this is probably useful. These are there is an army of trolls essentially, and these are, I think, each large box is a single troll with all the HP involved. So 1 double spread, 2 double spreads, and yeah. Then you've also got a very... And there's no single map on this, which is perhaps unfortunate. It is something you have to flick between a multi-spread map, which will of course look better if you have the digital version and you print it out or something. But yeah, you can see there. There is also, I think, a colour version online of the whole file, which, yeah, high-res maps available, free download. So no complaint from me about that at that level, but obviously it's basically because he wants to have large splashes so that you can read the space properly. And in one sense, that's unfortunate because, and less usable because it gives you less context. You have to go online to get that. Lots of new monsters. I mean, 4, 5, 6, 7 new monsters. Archdark, Shadow Demon, Boletasaur, Bonefish, Kusith, Elderweird, Mura, and Solifhydra. A bunch of new spells. He often puts in new spells as well as new magic items and new monsters. Several pages of new items here. This is actually probably the biggest on magic items of all of them, I think. There are 7 new pages of magic items. Plus 3 pages of random occurrences, which is both events and discoveries. There is optional. There's a set of optional encounters. Lots of factions, lots of things to discover. It's basically if your players like slow, dangerous exploration, and that is a really real and popular genre and a good genre. If they like quite complicated, large battles, again, perfectly popular, then this is going to be good. And it is an entry into the breadth of his work. It is less exciting to me, though I do like it, and I will, I'm sure, use it in some format. We are then getting up to some of the really exciting, unique stuff, because there you're still talking about something where you're in the Gygax zone of making adventures. That maps to something like D2 and 3. Once we hit a Fabled City of Brass, which is 12th level or above, you are talking about genuinely high level in a way that very few AD&D adventures do, even including 2nd edition. And so I'll point you to my review on that if you want a much more detailed view. But basically, yep, it's as you can tell, it's beautifully produced, full colour, internal maps, art, both original art and I think some good open domain art, but lots of it was original for this. Amazing monsters, amazing setting. The City of Brass is not, in this case, an Efreet city, but the place the Efreets are afraid of, those who enslaved them, the Gringlings, the same as the Lich in Zhelwai Fall. It's incredibly atmospheric, it's incredibly varied, it's vast, it has lots of things going on. It's incredibly exciting. It has an enormous new bestiary, with lots of unique monsters as well as ones you can replicate. Lots of interactive things, despite being a dead city. Lots of things you can interact with. Lots of puzzles and toys. It's one of the best modules ever, and particularly one of the best high-level modules ever. The other ordinary, inverted commas, high-level module is for 14th and higher, HU6, the Dream House of the Nether Prince. This is an intentionally metal cover. That's very much Anthony's taste. This is the last one he has so far published. As I say, if we go and pressure him for publishing more of those blog adventures. With a foreword by Alan T. Grow Jr., Grow Dog, a great supporter and friend of Tony's, and yeah, of course, one of the great experts on Greyhawk lore. And yeah, the canon consists of 5 books in order of authority, which Tony says starts with not the DMG or the Player's Handbook, but Monster Manual 2. Very sympathetic with that view. MM2 is incredibly underrated. This starts with a whole section called the Enchiridion, Way to Live, but which is about how demons live. It's quite long, and this is, by that I mean it's 10 or 11 pages long. This is partly a thing you can generally use, and partly something to help you cope with the complexities of magical and combat interactions you're going to have at Cadis High. Cadus High is an astral base of Orcus. Well, sorry, it's a base of Orcus in the Abyss for when he is going into the astral. It's a fortified summer house, but it's where he goes dreaming, but it's inhabited by a court of, as it's here, powerful semi-permanent guests, many of the most dangerous demons the Abyss has to offer. The high concept of this adventure is a stronghold that seems impenetrable at first, but is actually quite porous. Porous meaning that because this is the Abyss, there are cracks, open doors, and certain death everywhere. If this was hell, everything would be locked down, but not even a demon prince can control the chaos of the Abyss. And then we get just a multi-level. How many levels is it again? It is something suitably insane. 1, I mean, it's 2, 3, 4. 4 level. Quite big, and these are detailed, large levels. Let's. Is it 1, 2, 3? Yeah, I think four levels. For instance, you're likely to come in the pardon me, the Warrens. That's a player map versus a DM map. So that's 1 level. So they're reasonably large without being enormous, and then that goes up for 3 levels with all kinds of stuff going into it. But here's the thing, that really Orcus wants to come to get to know you so that he can ally with you to fight Demogorgon. So you're doing this thing where you're breaking into the Abyss, you're going around all this crazy stuff, and it's all very well realised. It is, in that sense, the pinnacle. The final adventure he released officially, and the pinnacle, I think, of his art. But you're doing all this crazy stuff. You're finding all this crazy stuff. You're learning as a DM all these rules that you could use elsewhere. You've got an enormous appendix of different, Celestial Honey, Black Ray Pistol, Bring Me its Head, which is a grimoire. Abyssal Weapons, Behold, Reaver's Hand Axe, Planar Compass, Possess Potions, Vance Abyssal Satchel. You're talking about 20 pages of that, and you have whole double-page spreads on the demon princes who are going to fight. You have obviously you've got your original art and page descriptions, which are fairly concise. Written in his style, I think it's something where he is neither incredibly terse nor expansive. 3 or 4 rooms to a page is actually normal in the dungeon key-like ones, so not Joanne Full where he does a spread system. You're doing all this crazy stuff, you've got access to all this crazy material, it's this metal concept album, and then you end up fighting demon princes. It is the culmination of a campaign, arguably it's intended as that. And whatever happens afterward with those PCs and with that setting, nothing's going to be the same, is it? So yes, that is, again, somewhat like Fable City, very much like it. It's a very rare and excellently realised high-level adventure. It is better laid out and sorted than Fable City. I probably prefer thematically Fable City. I think some people will prefer Nether House. The Dream House, sorry. So yeah, finally, what he's most famous for, it may not be his best module. As I've kind of implied, we've got a couple of contenders there for most important or best module. It is certainly his least well organised module, which says something about its quality that I'm still saying it might be his best. But Nightwolf Inn, I have an adventure review on this channel. I point you there for more. But again, you get the metal theming very early, don't you? The Nightwolf Inn is a module in the sense that there is a dungeon involved, there are stories and plots involved to discover, there is a whole thing where there are lots of worlds you can visit from this place, and so there's, functionally infinite adventure material. But it's also not a module in terms of it's not a singular adventure, it's a module in terms of it's a campaign. It's a thing you have in your world that frames your world, that lets your players discover all kinds of crazy secrets, go all kinds of places, find things that interest them. There are so many puzzles, not all of which are all part of the same puzzle. There's a massive puzzle of which many bits connect throughout this vast 4-level, including very large dungeon-like cellars in 5 level possibly, actually. So there's all these puzzles, many of which connect to the big puzzle of who or what the Nightwolf Inn is, and the Inn Master, and the secrets and why it's there. But also, there's just, there's lots of stuff you can go and find out in the worlds you can visit, which are very unique and interesting. The rooms of the inn, much like Mr. Ben. There's also just other puzzles which have nothing to do with anything. They're just there, they're fun, they're interesting. You can go and get trapped in basically a room for a year, which feels like 100 years or something like that, and you're a skeleton for that period of time, but when you come out, if you survive a system shock roll, you're then immune to disease. There's some crazy stuff. And that has nothing to do with anything else. The Dark Passage, you keep walking down a corridor, you end up in a different plane. Doesn't have it. There ain't no point to the game, to quote Soldier Boy. It's just crazy stuff, but it's stuff that fits into this environment which bridges the gap between adventure and adventure. So you have your big adventures, and then you have this ongoing puzzle that ends up running arguably beyond, if you wanted to, definitely if you wanted to, running beyond the kind of level you might be talking about to do with Dreamhouse, where you might end up fighting something known only as the Devourer, which is I guess of a power level with the Demogorgon and Orcus, but where the stakes have ended up becoming a lot higher for a lot of people. So that is Tony Huso's work. I think originality, there is no other author who does those things, who is able to draw together all those influences. He actually is a little like Bruce Cordell in terms of the influence of Lovecraft, the Far Realm, that kind of psychological supernatural horror. But he is also one of a kind. None of those adventures that he's published really fit that's an ordinary adventure. Something like the Dreaming Tower flirts with being ordinary, or Palace of Ulray, and that may be why he hasn't published them. All 6 published adventures are, with a maybe partial exception from Mortuary Temple, are very distinct. There is not just nothing like them, but they are products of a particular mind. This vast work of teenage genius in the Nightwolf Inn's case, which is just something which a whole campaign can be based around. The high-level adventures, which are basically unequalled. There are maybe a couple of other adventures in that kind of high-level bracket which match their quality of Fabled City and Dreamhouse. And the kind of vast grandeur of something like Geolos Incruel. So for depth, many of them are well executed. I think there is an iteration of quality over the course of the 6 main modules, which they become better and better. They are not as aggressively usable as some more recent OSR stuff, but then maybe there's a space for that. You can end up focusing much more on tactility than on fun, and the kind of the vast array of madness that he puts out there as a writer is something which maybe you need to luxuriate in a bit. And for originality, like I've already said, it's not just that he's a unique writer, there are also ideas there that expand our ability to think about designing. Zhao and Fall of all of them actually maybe being the most obvious one. How do you make a good low-level planar adventure? Something which, looking at your Spelljammer and your Planescape stuff, there's very little of. You can see something like Planar Compass, I guess, leaning into that area. But yes. Anyway, you tell me what you think about him in the comments, what your favourite adventures by him are. And if you've not heard about him, I recommend you go and find out more if you're interested. Till next time.